announcement to make. This event is part of our program, which is related to a very peculiar story related to the historiography. This is the project that is administered by the Center for Urban History, but we are not the psychotherapeutic or psychological organization. We do not offer therapy, but we love them very much. So since the beginning of the war, we have been collecting the diaries with the students of the Ukrainian Catholic University. These are the diaries of the war. We started recording them, and in the process, we identified the entire cluster of documents related to dreams. These were the transcripts of dreams, literally. So we tried to focus on that, and this way, we sort of attracted the group of supporters, so to say. Last year, we already had several events about that. We have Billy Greer here present. He delivered a lecture about the sequences, dream sequences in films as they are incorporated in cinema. He talked about the tools that the film directors use and why these aspects are used in films. And then we had another lecture last year. It was related to the dream of the prisoners of Auschwitz. These were the Polish inmates, prisoners of Auschwitz. It's the project that started back in the 1970s when the researchers from the Polish Academy of Sciences were recording the dreams, the descriptions of dreams of the former Auschwitz inmates. Professor Chomsky analyzed these dreams, and he wrote several pieces, books, and articles and essays about it. It was a very interesting content that he shared with us. Today we have the third meeting about Zolkos will be telling us about, well, the title of the presentation is Dreaming About War with Bion. It's difficult to translate dreaming into Ukrainian, but we should try to discuss this and try to discuss around this topic. We're going to talk about Wilfred Bion. It's one of the most interesting post-war of dreams after Freud, I believe. His contribution into the analysis of dreams is certainly one of the major following Freud. So we shall talk about the war and the dreaming. Tonight we also have the commenter, the head of Department of Psychology and Psychiatry of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Roman Kechur. But I will introduce him later before I'm going to pass the floor. And now I'm switching to English to introduce our participant and the lecture, and we will proceed.
To welcome all of you. We didn't expect to have such a big audience today, since the seminar has a very kind of particular subject connected to not that popular like Freud or like Lacan or I don't know, other names. Wilfred Bion is rather less known, at least in Ukraine, but Wilfred Bion introduced a lot to our understanding of dreams and dreaming. And specifically about this phenomenon and about dreams as sources, historical sources, but then also how dreams can be interpreted by various scholars and various disciplines, will talk Magdalena Zolkos. Magdalena Zolkos is associate professor at the Department of Social Sciences and Philosophy at the University of Uuskala in Finland. Magdalena lived for many years in Australia. She graduated from the Birkbeck University in the UK, and she also has the Polish origin, so this is closer to us, at least culturally, yes. And her areas of research include psychoanalytic political theory, intersections between violence and culture, and politics of embodiment. Her most recent book, Restitution and the Politics of Repair, Trop's Imaginaries Theory, was published by Edinburgh University Press 2 years ago. Now it's 3 years ago. And Magdalena made me think a lot about contemporary thinkers like Didi Huberman, and complexity of images and traumatic experiences that are often embodied in cultural form. Our commenter for this lecture will be Roman Kechur. Roman Kechur is the head of the Department of Psychology and Psychotherapy of the Ukrainian Catholic University. He is practicing psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and he's teaching and supervising works and doing research at the Catholic University. And while I was looking for somebody in Lviv who knows, not personally, of course, but who knows the aura of Bion from academic perspective, and all the fingers were directed to Roman Kechur. So he's, that's why he was asked today or tonight, and he will comment Magdalena's presentation. So without any further ado, I think I said everything. Roman is with us, Magdalena is with us. So I'm giving floor to Magdalena Zolkos, and we are ready to listen about dreaming the war together with Bion.
Thank you so much, Bohdan. Before I started, I wanted to say thank you for being here to everybody, but especially thank you to the organizers, to Bohdan Shumylovych, of course, for the kind invitation, to the commentator, and also thank you to the translator, who's, I'm sure, going to be doing a wonderful work today. And I also wanted just very shortly, together with my greetings, express the solidarity with all of you in Ukraine or from Ukraine, and say what you probably have heard many times in this last year, which is my deepest admiration for the bravery with which you are resisting this brutal war. So Slava Ukraine. And I will move to the paper without further ado. So, dreaming about war with Bion. Can those who dream in the times of war be considered witnesses to history? Charlotte Berat, who collected dreams in her Berlin neighborhood for 6 years in 1930s, which she subsequently published in her book, The Third Reich of Dreams, certainly seemed to agree. In the afterword to the book, the German historian Reinhard Koselleck addressed the problem of what it means to approach the site of dream as historical testimony. And he argued that the significance of dream archive, as he puts it, lived in the very fact, and I quote, that rather than offer a realistic representation of history, what the dreams do is they throw, I quote, a particularly glaring light on the very reality from which they came, right? So a common feature of dreams that Berat collected about the growing Nazism, Koselleck continues, was that dreams made known a truth which was concealed in reality, but had not yet become intelligible or empirically intelligible. In other words, dreams bring to the surface something that is unknown or unseen in other narratives or discourses about war. Of course, Koselleck is interested in a very idiosyncratic aspect of Berat's project, which is that dreams seem to point to history which is yet to come to pass, right? Which is yet to come, a kind of prolepsis, prophecy of a catastrophe to come. What I want to develop in the paper is, I call it a theoretical testimonial account of dreams in relation to war. And what I mean by this is to suggest or make an argument that we can think of dreams as moments of disclosure that happen not only in the realm of individual psyche, but also in the realm of culture, right? That bring to the light knowledge about war and about war's violence that doesn't register in public consciousness otherwise. And it certainly does not register in like dominant discourses of war, political, social, economic, military, security, and so on. So before I get there, let me make like a little bit of a roundabout kind of pathway there. The problem of proposing what I'm doing today, which is that dreams can be considered a form of testimony to war, leads me through a terrain of so-called witnessing studies or witnessing theory, but also cultural trauma studies. And this is because it is in discourses around cultural collective trauma that this problem has arisen with a lot of poignancy, right? The problem of taking a material of psychic fiction as a form of historical testimony. So let me give you an example of that. This isn't really an example of a dream, but a very important example of a situation when psychic fiction serves as a form of historical testimony. And it comes from a book that Shoshana Fellman and Dori Laub wrote in early 1930s, in which Dori Laub describes a case in which he himself participated as an academic, but also a scholar, but also a psychoanalyst. And this is in the context of his participation or his role in creating a video archive for Holocaust testimonies at Yale University. So in the book, he describes one of the cases which generated a lot of discussion. He gives an account of what we could call a slippage or a misrepresentation that one of the female survivors gives when her testimony is recorded. So what the survivor testifies to is she talks about an event of a revolt in Auschwitz, right? A revolt that was an attempted revolt by the prisoners. And one of the things that they managed to achieve is they blew one of the crematorium chimneys. Now, in her testimony, she reports that she saw all 4 chimneys exploding, right? Being blown up by the inmates who had risen in revolt. But the sort of historical fact is that only one chimney was destroyed. So the woman says, and I'm going to quote this, "All of a sudden, we saw 4 chimneys going up in flames, exploding. The flames shot into the sky. People were running. It was incredible." End of quote. So, while for historians involved in the project, this factual inaccuracy rendered the whole testimony fallible, right? It undermined the credibility of the witness's voice. Laub, in his discussion, insists that the woman was articulating a different kind, what he calls a different kind of testimonial truth, a different kind of historical knowledge. Truth that for those with a lived experience of the camp, the uprising was nothing short of something unthinkable, right, in their specific circumstances. He calls it an unimaginable occurrence, the breakage of a frame. The truth was only accessible to the witness, right, in this unconsciously twisted form, if you like, right? So only through a distorted image, through a displacement of historical fact, was she able to testify to this larger truth of something unthinkable taking place. This is Laub's argument, okay? So I very much agree, and I take a lot of inspiration from his discussion. But in the paper, I also note something that Laub nevertheless misses in his analysis, and that is the striking resemblance between the woman's testimony, right, the citation I have just given you, and a description or a report of a dream, right? The speech act, her speech act, right, that I quoted, has this quality of a dream-like hallucination, right? You don't know, there's a certain uncertainty whether she's describing something she have witnessed in a conscious state or perhaps something she has dreamed, or maybe both. The image of the destroyed crematoria carries a mark of discursive operation that, drawing on Freud, we could call disfigurement or distortion, right? In Freud's dream book, he calls something like this occurring in a dream Entstellung, something that transforms the raw material at hand, right? Which is the witness's corporeal, emotional experience of the event she participated in into a narrative fabric of a dreamlike narrative fabric, which is being stitched together, but as we see, imperfectly, right? She makes an error, she makes a mistake. It is the error or the inaccuracy that looks like a crack on the surface of a narrative, right? The narrative coherence gives in the moment she makes this mistake, and it splits open. So the word I use in the paper is dehiscence, or a tear, rend, right? Dehiscence is when you have a wound, right, that has been surgically stitched together and the wound comes apart. So you've got a suture, this is what the dream narrative creates, and you've got dehiscence, a tear, a rend in this testimonial dreamlike narrative. This kind of scene or this interpretation of a testimony, right, that pivots on an error that seems like it also signifies something. It's a necessary slippage, right? It's something that very much sort of encapsulates the argument that I'm going to try to make about thinking of dreams as a war testimony. So basically, the crux of my argument is that in thinking about dreams that people have during war, the process of dreaming, right, during war, as a form of witnessing, we need to account for this dual movement without reducing one to the other or without opposing them. So we need to think about dreaming in relation to history, both as this kind of narrative suturing of bringing together or linking, this is important concept for Bion, something together, but also never at the cost of forgetting the dehiscence, right? Forgetting the necessary sort of coming apart. Such sutures, right? Dreams translate or convert the lived human experience of historical violence in that they are part of a process of linking disparate elements into a narrative. But as dehiscence, right, dreams appear to us in their idiosyncratic phenomenology of disunified objects. So this, in my view, is really the hallmark of psychoanalytic insight, right? The question, what can we learn from psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic theory of dreams when we want to approach and study dreams during war? Dreams carry with them a seed, right? This is kind of a key psychoanalytic insight, if you like, of that which remains unprocessed. So Freud, of course, is the first that articulates this point when he speaks about the famous navel, right, the belly button of a dream, Nabel, right, which he describes as the dream's point of contact, when the dream comes into contact with the unknown, something that ruins the narrative fabric that dreaming has knitted or woven, right, the story that the dreamer tells or envisions. So I propose in the paper that we can talk about the testimonial capacity of dreams precisely insofar as we find ways and language to attend to both of these vectors in dreams' encounter with history, so the dehiscence suture dialectic. To put it in another way, a dream becomes a testimony to war irreducibly in a dual capacity, by making something known and knowable about this experience, and by simultaneously touching upon or reaching up to what remains unknowable, something about the experience of war's violence that is liminal, right? That points to the threshold of knowability. So it is with that I turn to Wilfred Bion, not as someone that can resolve the tension between the suture and the dehiscence of a dream, but someone that helps us, I think about those two in relation to one another and not in opposition. So Bohdan has made some words of introduction. Indeed, Wilfred Bion perhaps is not the most known psychoanalyst in continental Europe, right? Perhaps it's a bit different in the Anglophone tradition of psychoanalysis, where he has been quite influential. But let me say just a few words, not a massive biography of this very fascinating thinker and practitioner of psychoanalyst. Wilfred Bion was born in 1897. He died in 1979. And he's not a surprising choice for probing the relation between dreams, war, and testimony. And this is because Bion makes a path-breaking contribution to psychoanalytic theory of dreams, second perhaps only to Freud, but also, and perhaps even more so, because Bion is not a stranger to war, right? He had a very personal, traumatic encounter with war. He served as a soldier in World War I, and his kind of central preoccupation of his theory, which is the mind's capacity and incapacity to know what is unbearable, right? He calls it unbearable emotional truth. The idea is shaped very much in the context of war, right? Very much in the context of experiencing war and the way it affects, the way that war sort of generates these unbearable emotional experiences. Bion, as I said, was not a stranger to war. As a young man, he experienced battlefield. He served as a tank commander in the Royal Tank Regiment of the British Army. He participated in numerous combats, and I can speak more to that in the question time if that's interesting. And he created also a set of diaries, right? So here you've got diaries of these experiences, which were published as War Diaries, 1917, 1919. And they're written partly as letters to his parents and partly these kind of episodic narratives of his memories written many years later. So it's kind of an eclectic text. I'm not addressing here that question of Bion's war experience and its impact on his dream theory in any exhaustive ways. And in fact, there is already a scholarship that does it very well. But let me just say that the question sort of that reverberates for Bion is, how is it possible to think in situation of war or in a situation such as war? Okay. The constitutive element of a war situation for Bion is that of encapsulating the subject within an unbearable, horrific, painful experience that is precisely defined by rendering the subject incapable to think through what they are experiencing, what they are living through. Brown calls this depletion of contemplative faculty by war as, I think, very poignantly, thinking under fire, right? So Bion's theory of thinking is how to think under fire. And Fred Alford, another, I think, very influential Bionian cultural theorist, describes this subject, Bion subject, as being unable to know, unable to hold and link together feelings that cannot be put into words, right? The unbearable pieces and fragments of feeling. So war for Bion has always this dual meaning. It's literal, it's a historical reference point, but then in his theory, it's also imbued with a plethora of other meanings, right? Meanings that suggest a situation of great psychic intensity. Considered from the perspective of war's effect on the mind, Bion uses that term, war, in a way that closely approximates horror. Yeah, Sucher uses the phrase of mind fracturing horror, right? An effective and embodied state of being that manifests itself through a bodily paralysis or stiffening or petrification, if you like, of body and mind. So war for Bion means a ruination of the apparatus for thinking. The subject freezes under the impact and there's a failure of emotion recording apparatus. Now, both Bion's account of the injury that the subject sustains in war and in his sort of affirmative theory of the thinking apparatus, right, relies on a relational view of the psyche. This is there's like a massive debate around this that I don't want to dip into, whether Bion can be considered representative of relational psychoanalyst, because he doesn't fit in the tradition in any easy way. This doesn't concern me today, but what I want to say, which is I think more important, is that Bion has a notion of relationality, right? And which is to say that the way he thinks about subjects, and you will see in a moment how his idea that we dream never as individual atomistic beings separated from each other, but we dream together, right, translates into his idea of a subject. So never sort of an isolated self, but what we might call an interactional selfhood. So when Bion says mind, he always means intermind, right? So there's always an element of the other, relation to the other in when we think. When he says self or selfhood, the assumption is interself or interselfhood. There is always the other implicated in it. Now, in order to process or absorb the basic or archaic feelings, right? This is, so let's say, traumatic experiences of war. And Bion has a very idiosyncratic sort of term for them. He calls them beta elements. So not alpha, but beta elements, right? Basic archaic feelings at the level of a corporeal experience. So you could say how war registers on the body, right? Through what emotions, through what bodily reactions does it register? For Bion, these basic or archaic feelings, in order to be absorbed by the subjects, in order for us to be able to process them, they always need to make a detour through the other. Okay, so when you think about the iconic psychoanalytic scenario, an infant and a mother, right? Infant also experiences a lot of basic archaic feelings, sensations, bodily sensations of what it means to be in the world, right? How the world registers itself on the body. Now, in order to absorb them, to translate them, to activate them in a thinking process, those beta elements need to be redirected towards the mother, whose imagination helps the baby, the infant, think them through, right? So the mother, for Bion's, lends the child her own thinking apparatus and helps reshape, detoxify, transform these sensations, and especially the primary sort of horrors of the baby. So this might be getting a little bit complex, but I want to kind of delve together with you one step farther, because if you know psychoanalysis, especially British tradition of psychoanalysis, that already rings a bell. So Melanie Klein, right, the founding mother of British psychoanalytic tradition, has described a very similar scenario, and she calls it projective identification. And what this means is that there are these elements that the subject cannot bear to think of themselves, something that they find unthinkable, unacceptable, unbearable, horrors which they cannot process about themselves, some horrific experiences. They project them onto that other, right? And then by identifying the other with that, right? So the subject splits and externalizes and ascribes to the other what they cannot think of themselves. So Bion very much follows Melanie Klein on this. But what he does is he depathologizes. So for Melanie Klein, this is a pathological development, right? In fact, it's all about helping the self accept and integrate these kind of unbearable elements. But Bion says, and I quote, "The mind in a terrified state so any infant's mind, but also the mind in a warlike situation, requires the mother, requires an other, right, to deal with these feelings and return them in a less toxic form, end of quote. Bion argues that mind under stress, so in a warlike situation, collapsing under the overwhelming intensity of the psychic experience, in a warlike situation requires other minds to function, right, by helping to contain the horror of that experience. In other words, by agreeing to think together, endure together, co-suffer, and I want to argue, dream together, dream war together. So, should I go on? Is the translation working? Okay, I'll just go on and you stop me.
No.
Not. Now, the reverse is also true, right? And Bion writes about this a lot, which is that the kind of kernel of trauma or war trauma of that experience is encapsulated by psychic abandonment. Right? To make it more specific, there is a lot of that material in his war memoirs, right? The figure of what he experienced at the Battle of Amiens, especially, where Bion finds himself abandoning a fellow soldier, and an image or a scene that recurs in war memoirs. I think he repeats it 4 times, right? So for him, this paradigmatic figure of the horror of psychic abandonment is a solitary figure of a wounded, dying soldier who cries out for their mother on the battlefield, right? And whose cry remains unaided and unanswered, who is left alone with their pain and their dread. So this is what the experience of war means for Bion. Not only the sort of debilitated capacity for thinking about the experience, but the loss of relationality that he describes as abandonment by the other. So this is the main terrain. And now let me make 2 points before kind of coming to an end. Circle back to the question of dreams and their relation to war. So I need to say 2 things about Bion, and I think that is so distinctive and original about his theory of dreaming. And the easiest and sort of standard way of doing this is contrasting Bion and Freud, right? So the interesting thing about how Bion intervenes in that terrain that remained undisturbed almost and uncontributed to since the interpretation of dreams, right, in 1900, is that he both thinks about dreams as something much broader than what Freud does, but also something that's narrower. So this is the kind of difficulty, right? He reshifts his idea of a dream, what even dream is, what is the oneirotic phenomenology, both expands the scope and narrows it down. Okay. So Bion picks up, develops, and in fact defines himself very much as a continuator of Freud, right? Not his critic or challenger, but he also clearly shows the limitations of the, standard wish fulfillment theory of dreams, which is very much the story of the dream story for Freud. Perhaps no more convincingly than he does in relation to war, when he notes in his memoirs that on the eve of battle, and let me read this quote because it's very moving, he says, "One gets the most appalling dreams, and yet when you wake up, you don't know whether it wouldn't have been better to go on sleeping. The dreams, right, the nightmares that soldiers were getting on the eve of the battle are so much better than the actual reality we have to face now." So if there ever was a statement that challenges the wish fulfillment theory of dreams in Freud, I think that is very much this, right? For Freud, the work of a dream is the unconscious wish being sort of smuggled in, right, in the manifest content of the dream through a set of disguising procedures. This is replaced by Bion with the notion of also a work of, like for him, there's also work of dream work. It's a process that transforms the sensuous impressions, stimuli that register on the body, right? The beta elements, the raw, inchoate, non-mental proto-emotions into a material of psychic quality that is imbued with meaning. For Bion, dreaming really is the primary psychoanalytic function of the mind. This is how Schneider puts it, right? He calls dreams work in progress, part and parcel of our pursuit of truth, right? It's our strive to discover what is real about our experiences, not a material to be subjected then to analysis to understand, but the dreams themselves are already analytical. They are already interpretative, right? Through dreaming, we interpret what we experience. It's a kind of a metabolism of experience, digestive process of experience. Now, what follows is that rather than like Freud, who thinks that, you know, in dreams, there is a univectoral operation. The unconscious works on the conscious mind, right? So there is very much one vector, one direction. Bion wants to think about dreams as this complex interplay, multivectoral, concurrent, reciprocal. So unconscious works on the conscious and the other way around. So you might know the very famous Freudian phrase, that dream interpretation is the royal road to the unconscious. And Bion, in one of the interviews, says, or in his seminars, he says, he wants to rethink dreaming as a two-way traffic on that royal road, right? So I think very apt and also quite funny. Okay. So how does he narrow down and broaden this dream concept? Bion widens the Freudian notion of the dream because he suggests, and this is difficult to wrap our head around, I think, it's very clear, that dreams are not only that which we register when we are asleep, okay? And that's difficult about Bion's work because he will use the word dreams and dreaming more broadly to describe diverse activities of the mind. So fantasy, free associations, children's play, reverie, daydreaming, they have this common denominator, which he describes as the decrease in conscious efficiency, okay? And I think this perspective is consistent with my opening suggestion of this image of exploding chimneys, right? Which isn't really dreamt, like it doesn't happen in the state of sleep, but fits very much how Bion wants us to think about dreams. I'm skipping here a little bit because the time is running out. Now, dreams for Bion, they don't produce factual or objective narratives of war. I don't know if there is anyone who would actually agree that they do that, right? But what dreaming does is it makes war personal. So dreams help kind of convert, if you like, war as an event, right, into a reality that is lived. So a kind of meeting point between the body and history. So, and he means it in a very literal way, and that is, I think, what is very much missing in the meta discourses on war, is that if war is an experience that is lived, right? War is seen, war is heard, war is felt on the skin, right? Tasted, smelled. It's an event that the body registered in relation to its proprioception, right? How it orientates itself in space, but also nocioception, how it registers at the level of pain. So a dreamer is a witness, not because they are able to contribute factual evidence, though of course they might be able to do that as well. But the importance of dreaming, witnessing nexus lies in the idea of dreaming as metabolism of that experience, right? Now, I also said that Bion narrows down the Freudian conception of dreams. So this shows how he widens it, but he also narrows it down, right? And this is because Bion, and this is no less counterintuitive to the previous theoretical move, he makes a distinction between actual, genuine dreams, right? This is the dreams where the mental operation takes place that transforms the raw experience into elements of a narrative, right? Makes it a psychic material that subjects can use. But he also talks about false dreams or dreamlike kind of fantasies that really are not dreams. And I think that's equally difficult to wrap our heads around as a theory that something we experience outside of sleep is dream, right? He calls them dreams that are no dreams, right? Hallucinations are those. Now, how do you recognize them, right? Bion says you can recognize them by the absence of or failure of this kind of metabolism of experience. Something becomes inoperative. So he gives as an example traumatic dreams like night terrors that recur over and over again. For example, for someone that has experienced trauma, right? So the concept of dreams, right, as a kind of, on one hand, works in progress, right? This sort of emotional conversion of experience, of bodily experience, here meets its counterpoint of the failure of that function, right? In where dreams, rather than metabolism of experience, can also be symptoms of mental indigestion. That's actually Bion's phrase, right? A sign of something that the witness has not quite survived, right? A sign that the witness or something in the witness has not quite survived. And Bion, when he describes his traumatic experiences of war, especially the Battle of Amiens, he says more than once, this is the day when I died. Right? So it's very poignant. He suggests something about him, something in him has not survived. Right? So it's not, I think Bion is sometimes misunderstood as someone that has a very affirmative theory of dreams, but there is, I think, also an important motif of how trauma operates in dreams. So let me finish with a question, which I borrow from Schneider, but also others who have read Bion and written on him. And I hope this will help me sort of square all the dots in this paper. If, for Bion, right, the dream does not need an analytical situation, right, doesn't need an interpretation, because dream is already a kind of interpretation. So we don't need that Freudian scenario of an analyst which will help explain the meaning of the dream. Why does the dreamer bring their dream to the analyst? What is the point of that, right? Or to rephrase and show you how this is relevant for our discussion today, if dreaming as a testimony does not provide an objective historical evidence, does not lend itself to historical interpretation, right? Doesn't make our factual knowledge of war any more complete. To put it rather crudely, what is the point, right? Of witnessing through dreams? What is the point of positing dreams as witnessing of history? Now, Bion's answer is as simple as it's striking, right? When the dreamer brings a dream to the analyst, this is not to have the dream interpreted. This is because they need that other mind, right? They need that other to help them dream of what they are incapable of dreaming in the specific moment, right? That work in stasis or the undreamt in dreams. They bring the dream to the analyst to dream together. Okay? So you see how I'm moving back to Melanie Klein, right? What remains undreamt then can be offered as sojourn in the other and of the other. The dream and testimony nexus highlights, I think, specifically this relational dimension of witnessing, where testimony is also always both a response and a form of address to the other. If every witnessing utterance contains within it a plea to be believed, right? This is how Jacques Derrida defines testimony, that every witness, even implicitly, articulates a plea, believe me, I have been there. I have a hard evidence, believe me, I have lived through it, right? Bion adds to it that this belief in testimony is an act of openness of the other, right? Openness by the other and act of receptiveness of the other to our experiences, to our dreams. So to lend one's own capacity for dreaming in times of war, for imagination, for dreaming, for reverie, is, I think, to endure war together, right? To affirm, I am with you, I dream with you, and to bear one another's agony of war. With that, and I conclude, Bion sketches out, I think, an ethical horizon of receptiveness to the other in dreams, to what the other cannot bear to dream as a counteract to the horror of abandonment in war. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Magdalena. I really apologize for these technical problems that we have. We have already some questions in the chat, but we also know that our commenter, Roman Kechur, will have to leave sooner, so we are eager to listen to his comments. Пане Романе, будь ласка, якщо можете,
Roman, you're welcome.
Ми би радо прослухали
ваші... We would be happy to listen to your opinion and view, but the therapy is the mutual tango, and actually the title of the lecture says that we are talking about and dreaming about the work together with Bion. So this is like the joint shared work, and you only need the psychoanalyst to borrow another or other's mind. But maybe you could tell us more, and you can give us a broader perspective beyond the view on dreaming. Thank you, Bohdan, for inviting. It's an honor. And thank you, Magdalena, for the brilliant presentation. I love Bion the same as you do. Besides, my daughter is currently staying in Helsinki. She has the internship in her medical school, so I'm happy to see somebody else coming from that area. It's much colder there, but anyway, but it's very beautiful. Now more about Bion. Why do I love him? This is the man that had thought, the thinking, but also he was in combat. He was during the Great War in the tank division. He was the medic in the hospital during the Second World War. So he had his experiences, and he had this experiment working with the groups of soldiers, and many of his theories are based on this experience. He was, I think, the student of Melanie Klein, but he was not the direct follower and supporter of Melanie Klein, I think, just a partial supporter. Also, there was this independent group in Britain who had these discussions among themselves, and there was the entire new theory of psychoanalysis that stemmed from that. So they had this debate, and they developed a new theory of psychoanalysis, which is called a theory of object-based relations, and Bion was one of the forefathers of this product. But in order to understand what you talk about, you need to understand the theory of thinking of Bion. I have an impression, well, this is similar to how learning Spanish in 10 minutes. And now I have 10 minutes to describe the theory that would require the entire course. But to be brief, I can explain that for Bion, thinking and dreaming is the synergic process. Everything that could be seen in the dream is the basis for thinking. This is the first stage, or maybe the final stage of thinking. Bion introduced the theoretical construct, which is called alpha function. Alpha function is the ability to transform the unthinkable into thinkable, something that doesn't have the representatives, what Kant actually called the uncognizable, the thing in itself. So these data elements of experience, no, it's not the experience, these are sensory feelings, including hallucinations, which are not the experience, and the ability of the psyche to transform this unexperienced into experience. This is called the alpha function. Alpha function is the primary basis of thinking and the primary basis for dreaming. I probably do not totally agree with you when you say that Bion is the supporter of the intersubjectivity. I think he was actually in that part the student of Klein, and she supported the theory of the internal psychic conflict. However, they were developing this object-based theory, and it means that the other is needed for the psychical to become possible. This process of constructing the mental, it needs to have the interaction with the other. That's why you need a psychoanalyst to bring your dreams to him. So you need this other. When I bring my dream to my psychoanalyst, I account it in this specific way, in this specific time, and in this specific manner. For another person, I will remember another dream, or maybe the same dream, but in another context. That in that regard, I agree with this intersubjective meaning of understanding the dream. What we hear and what we tell in the dreams, what we tell about our dreams, what we hear from others about our dreaming. This is not only the internal psychic experience of individual self, but this is also intrapsychic experience. There will be no account, no narration with the other. And then the dreaming doesn't make sense if it's not told to anyone. As Bohdan said, you cannot describe the same thing in other words, but it produces other things. In that point, Bion offers this approach of dreaming, daydreaming, which is similar to dreaming. He suggests that we process other and process self, not only through the concentration of thinking, but also through the disconcentration of thinking. And actually, Bion is discussing this in his works. He probably sees the theory of Freud as too narrow understanding of dreams. And this is sort of the device that helps us remember the latent dream, which can help us understand the meaning of the dream. But Bion thinks that dreaming is the way of symbolization. But I think that when you tell about the dream and this narration about the dream and the dream, they are different, because dream is a multimodal experience. The multimodal sensory experience. There is visual, audio, tactile, the senses, and visceral senses. So we have many images at the same time, but the account about the dreaming narrows this experience into the narrow narrative, into the narrow words. Freud says that before that, the process happens when you, as the film director, develop the storyline of words. This is that transforms into the piece of art. You can compare this to the painting, to music piece, or to film. And this impression, understanding, must be transformed into the verbal narrative, one modal, one unimodal entity. And beyond sense, what alpha function is the ability to think in images represented in different modalities. Also, Bion is trying to argue with Freud as his pupil. Well, he was not directly the student of Freud. Klein was in Berlin, but then in Budapest and then in Berlin. But he was not the direct student of Freud, but he identified himself and he identified Freud as this paternal figure. And Bion never went beyond psychoanalysis, and few psychoanalysts understand, you know, the true meaning is to symbolize the concept that he offers. Functional table, I mean. So to summarize, for Bion, dream is the foundation, the basis, and the expansion of thinking. What cannot be processed is hallucinated. What cannot be thought over is hallucinated. War attacks our thinking capacity, and we are hallucinating more than symbolizing, than thinking. Second conclusion, this part of unthinkable, unbearable, what we cannot think over, according to Bion, it's exercise to the projective identification. We make others live through our unexperience that we are unable to transform into the experience. What alpha function is not able to do, we are making other people reliving our experience. That's why the victim needs to be listened to. That's why the survivor, well, every person needs the other. That's why the patient needs the psychoanalyst. Because not every experience has been symbolized in that person. Some experience has been left hallucinating, and this hallucinated experience cannot be shared with the other. Like the mother back in the beginning can transform the unexperienced into the experience. That's why we need very much today the people who will do this work for us, because we are in the epicenter of this war, and this war limits our capacity of thinking. That's why we need other people to make sure that they can process our dreaming, our testimony of this kind. They must become our co-dreamers together with us. And then the pain, the grief will not end up as a trauma. It will end up as the unbearable, painful experience, but the experience. And then we will have a chance not to become victims of this war. We are part of this war. We are participants of this war. We are affected by this war. We suffer from this war. But we have a chance not to be the victims of this war. We will have the traumatic aspects of our experience. But the more other people we have, like Magdalena today, she is our psychoanalyst today. She is thinking with us. She is thinking with us about our dreams. The more chances like that we have, the more experiences like that we have today and after our war, the less traumatic leftovers we are going to have. Well, this is it for me. Thank you very much. I will have to leave at 8 p.m. sharp because I have another important meeting. It's a psychotherapeutic meeting, so I will have to leave in 20 minutes. Thank you very much. Could you comment this metaphor that Magdalena is using of abandoning in the battlefield, abandoning in the combat? Bion had the direct experience like that somebody died in his hands, and he transfers this therapeutic metaphor. Something is dying, is unsurviving. These unthinkable, unbearable things, they are like the soldier abandoned in the battlefield. It will never return. Well, this is part of our experience because we are all mortal, and other important people in our lives are also mortal. And death brings more meaning to our life. If we were immortal like God, then our stories wouldn't make much sense. To have sense, you need death. This is the concept of Bion. So abandoning in the battlefield, this disruption actually fosters the human capacity for thinking. Bion says the first thought appears when the mother is absent. When mother is always present, you cannot generate your own thoughts. Mama actually does the alpha function, but when the mother abandons, then you have a chance to generate, to develop this thinking apparatus. So the absent, abandoning mother also does a very important work. So this metaphor of abandoning in the battlefield actually is based on this absent mother. But I took much of your time now, so thank you very much, Roman, for your comment. And I give a chance to Magdalena to answer, to respond. Any feedback?
Professor Kechur's comments.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I don't want to take too much time because I'm really interested in like other people's questions, but I just wanted to say, Roman, I'm extremely grateful you've taken 5 minutes to put so beautifully and insightfully what I was trying to articulate. So it was just really a pleasure and honor listening to you. So thank you so much. And I've taken some notes. I'm definitely learning, but I just wanted, if I can add one thing to the very end, and also how the question that you asked, Bohdan, because I think that is very important. One thing I didn't say in terms of the biographical element is that Bion was really at the heart of war, and there is kind of an interesting comparison between him and someone like Winnicott, who was, you know, also a psychoanalyst who supposedly was in a battle. But Bion was at the heart of war. He was a tank commander. And in fact, tank is an important figure, you know, the figure of an object that contains, is related to tank. And that experience that really comes very close to war trauma is that it's him. He is abandoning one of the soldiers for whom he was responsible. He is this really very powerful image of looking at the soldier and realizing that half of the upper body, basically half of the lung, was missing, and that man had, I don't know, an hour to live. And the thing that stuck itself that he couldn't work through, so that what is undreamt about war for Bion is that he turns away from that man. And he says he's so overwhelmed with dread, disgust, and a thought that he just wants that man to die. He doesn't want him to be there. He doesn't want to experience him next to him. So that is, I think, very powerful, that abandonment isn't only an experience, an abandonment of us, but perhaps equally traumatic can be the experience of abandoning the other, right?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much.
I may start with questions, and thank you for these clarifications. But you and Professor Kechur, you both were talking about kind of this direct experience, especially in Bion's practice. Yes, so he is a therapist, and also he is a soldier. He's a fighter, and he, by his corporeal abilities, experiences the war almost physically on all levels. But then if I'm sitting here beyond computer, and watching news and seeing videos, I feel something. I have dreams about this. I experience this, but this is not direct experience. How Bion's model can explain this? Basically, my experience of non-experience of this war. Do I participate? I'm just rephrasing your question because you're asking like whether this has any meaning at all. So my dreams of somebody sitting in view beyond everything. It's like just watching the war on screen. Is it the experience of war? What is this? Can I actually testify in the court or whatever, in the God's court, that I experienced the war? I was the witness. Like this is what you started. Like our experiences would be very different. And like those chimneys, one is falling down, maybe four is the falling down. So about this truth and truthfulness, am I kind of this external observer is experiencing the war?
Yeah, great question, Bohdan. I mean, I would argue that in some ways you have a direct experience of war, maybe not of the battlefield, but so that would be maybe one way of thinking about this discussion, is that I think everyone right now in Ukraine has in some ways a direct experience in war, and maybe we need, and that's what I'm trying to do, not in this paper, think with Bion, but also with, for example, feminist theories around witnessing that say, the emphasis on direct experience, which is often the visual experience, perhaps renders invisible other ways in which the body, other senses that experience that register war. Right. So I have mentioned this when we spoke. I mean, me and Bohdan I have just concluded here a project of interviewing people that have sought refuge in Finland from Ukraine. We interviewed about 20 people, so it's not like a massive pool. But one thing, and they were all women, and one thing that registered, that really struck me, is that they all had in some ways direct experience in war, but none of them were in the battle and none of them saw war. I asked them, like, what did you see? But it was like they all heard war. And that made me think we need to think about witnessing, not I have been there, I have seen it, but I have been that, I have heard that, right? The sonic is so important, I think, in how war registers on the body. And proprioception, like they were this kind of really powerful testimonies of how disoriented bodies are, in war. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Elena Zaslavska. What is your take on the Jung theory of archetypes and symbols, and then how to explain the fact that people were dreaming war before the war has happened? This is from the chat.
Okay, well, okay, yeah. So, I mean, I would love to. So maybe the second question first. I would love to hear more about this. That's kind of, that was Christine Barat's project, right? That I would just love to hear about this more, because I have followed some of the projects that register, that sort of create these dream archives, but the before aspect I haven't seen in relation to specific cultural materials. So I would love to learn more. I mean, I can just agree with the way that like Kozelek reads Barat, which is that this is perhaps the limit of Freud, and the way that Freud has affected us, even without us being said, without us being able to say, oh, I am Freudian, is that we find it so hard to think of a dream as something that brings with immense visibility, intensity, and affect, something that is unfolding, yet to come, and that we cannot register otherwise. Right? And then about Jung, unfortunately, I don't really have much to say. I'm not Jungian, and I don't really, I have really steered a bit clear of Jung in my psychoanalytic studies. So perhaps others can speak to that. maybe Professor Kechur, but
we know that folklorists, they like, I see Oksana Kuzmenko here with us.
Я також не дуже добре знаю просто.
I'm not very good, I'm not very much versed in Jung. I think Jung is a psychoanalyst with his own tradition, but I'm not very...
I read several books, obviously.
Okay, we have a question from Zaven Babloyan. I will read it aloud from the chat. Let's imagine that a person who had war experience managed to translate part of the beta elements through alpha function, his, her own, or others, into alpha elements. If we consider the other part, non-processed beta elements, what could set is more shared with others who also had war experience? These unprocessed beta elements or alpha elements translated into words and conscious images. This is the question mark. In other words, what people with war experience might have more in common, processed alpha elements or unprocessed beta elements? It's a complicated question. Можливо, навіть до пана Романа. Але я не знаю, чи мені
Maybe it's the question for Roman.
Тут, пане Романе, є в чаті питання.
Roman, there is a question on the chat.
Якщо воно буквально узагальнити,
And if we generalize,
якщо люди, які мають досвід війни,
if people who have the war experience,
спільного, оці опрацьовані,
what is more shared, the unprocessed beta elements or alpha elements that have been processed? Psychoanalysts are avoiding the statistically oriented questions, but it is obvious that the more traumatic the experience, the lower our capacity to build the alpha function, the lower and more depleted our capacity is to process the experience. More experience is left unprocessed, unsymbolized in our body, our hallucinations, our imaginations that are dissociated with reality, in the manners of interacting with others. When we are making others live through the feelings that we have not processed, of course, I cannot give you the direct answer, but the people traumatized by the war will have more depleted alpha function. It will be underdeveloped.
Magdalena, do you have some comments on this?
I mean, I agree with what was just said very much. I mean, I kind of, maybe if I can just say one sentence by way of not answering the question, but it helps me to articulate something more strongly, is that in a way, I never asked this, what people have more in common, the kind of the beta or the alpha, because the thing that really interests me is not so much what they have in common, but how they dream together. So, you know, like I am not psychoanalyst, I am a cultural theorist, I'm a philosopher. And so when I think about, really, this is to think about projects like the ones that Bohdan and his colleagues have been undertaking, collecting war dreams from Ukraine. There is, of course, a historical value to these archives. But what I'm trying to say in the paper, in between the lines, is that these are not just academic archival projects. These are ethical projects that help to endure war together, right? That these are active, dynamic processes, not, of course, the situation of analysis with an analyst in a literal sense, but where people can help kind of bear or carry each other. Yeah.
Yes, this is what probably in some of your research you refer to this practices of retelling dreams to each other. Like we had in a previous session, Professor Ovcharsky story about the Auschwitz dreamers, and the important setting for those people was retelling dreams to each other in the daylight within the camp. So they were kind of fantasizing, telling these stories, retelling, remembering them, and so on. And what was interesting that within the camp, people had better dreams than when they were liberated. So when they became free out of camp, the dreams turned into nightmares. So it was interesting finding from his research. But there is a kind of continuous question from Zaven, who asks, so whether we think, or can we think about people who experience war as being united by this suffering? I just want to drop on this and say that all theories of nationalism emphasize that national community is basically the community which suffered together. Of course, we have these theories of imagining together, or communities of sentiment, communities of happiness, but basically all nations were made into nations by suffering, common suffering. But maybe you, Magdalena, have another take on that.
Yeah, I also agree, but I would just add one thing that yes, but I am consciously, deliberately trying to move away from thinking about suffering as that which people have in common, right? Which brings them together here. But I'm also moving away from language of survival, which I think is more ingrained in this literature on witnessing, right? Is the witness is someone who survived. And I'm developing more attention to the concept of enduring, because enduring is like surviving, but it has a duration. And I think, I mean, it's for you to tell me and not me to tell you, but I think perhaps that is more accurate. Is not to think about the war that you are suffering right now is not something that you have survived, because survival doesn't have a temporality, doesn't have a duration, but something you are in the process of enduring. And that might create forms of, political commonality or political togetherness that are maybe have possibilities that emphasis on suffering does not have.
Okay, so not suffering, but rather endurance as staying together, living together, kind of going through together. Is it correct?
Yeah, but of course I am not, I am not like, I'm not telling people they are not suffering if this is an important part of how they describe their experience. Yeah.
I have a question from Billy Glue. Billy, please go ahead.
Hiya, can you hear me okay? Oh, 1 second. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for your talk, Magdalena, very interesting. I just wanted to say one of the things that it made me, one of the comments you said was about how some soldiers had dreamt about going into battle, and then the day after they went into battle, and you're talking about whether or not that was like helpful or not, because maybe it would be better to not think about it and have, or maybe it was helpful to them. So I thought it was interesting to bring up that there's other dream theories. Obviously, there's lots of different theories of dreaming. So one of the theories I thought that might be an interesting way to think about that point what you made, if you consider Antti Revonso's theory of dreaming, which is that dreams are threat simulations, and also it relates to Alan Hobson's theory, which is similar, proto-consciousness, but mainly focusing on threat simulations. If you go along with that theory, it says that that's the point of every dream. Every dream is a way of simulating a threat, so you have a better chance to survive in your waking life. And consequently, if those soldiers knew they were going to go into battle the next day, it would make sense using that dream theory, because the soldiers would be running through possible scenarios that may happen to them in the actual battle, so that then if suddenly they became in a dangerous situation, they may be able to react and survive, or help someone else, or kill somebody who's attacking them or something. So I wondered if you'd considered Revonso's theory of threat simulation in relation to that particular point you were making there.
Yeah, thank you, Billy. Magdalena, you have this.
Yeah, I mean, just shortly, no, I haven't, but in the sense that because I'm working from within a tradition that, you know, is already layered, not to deny the value of it or the value of engaging those two, but because I'm trying to work through it with Bion. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
We have a question from Dr. Kuzmenko here in the chat. I will translate it into English and just read aloud. So in Piotr Cywiński's book about camp dreamers from Auschwitz, the dreams are grouped thematically and into a block of dream interpretation. The process of interpretation is either a separate way to find a way out of a traumatic situation or a way to find support in an uncertain situation. What is the theme of prophetic or lucid dreams? How does Bion accept it or not? So this is the question. Interpretations and then also lucid or prophetic dreams.
So I don't think Bion writes much about this kind of future perfect temporality of dreams. You know, this is kind of Lacan, and what is the temporality of the unconscious? It's the future perfect, right? So that will have been. This is really kind of a creative attempt on my part to marry together these two kind of scholarships by way of bringing witnessing theory or even trauma theory with Bion's dreams. Like that hasn't really happened much, I think, in the scholarship, but there's definitely a productive possibility there of marrying those together. So, I mean, the thing I would emphasize again is that this is in relation to interpretation. So doesn't have that sort of that to come, you know, the to come, to be appearing in a dream, is that this is really important, and such an important point of difference between Bion and Freud is that the dream itself is already interpretation. The dream does not need another discursive layer of explaining what the dream is about, right? And this is such a radical move. If there ever was a departure from Freud's theory of dreams, this is it.
Thank you, Magdalena. We have some comments also here in the chat. Irina Onishko says that for her, it was important to think that sharing dreams is a kind of surviving the war. So it's the experience will have more chances to remain in the future. So probably for some people, and I also observed that people retell these dreams as a way of sharing experience. So it's not just, oh, I had a dream and it's a funny story, but as you say, it's kind of looking for the other to kind of to it's not a therapy, but it seems like, as you say, the dream is a way of thinking, and it's already interpretation, and then you try to find the other to understand what happened during the dream and what the story is all about. Якщо є питання, будь ласка, підніміть руку в чаті.
If you have any other questions, please raise your hand. If there are no questions, I think we could approach the end of this event. Let me check. I can see Alexandra Lipanova.
I have a question. So it would be interesting to, like, for people who are experiencing the war, what if they do not dream? Would they then not be experiencing the same reality as those who are affected by war and don't necessarily dream? And I know you said that dreaming is not just during sleep, but like, what if people just don't interpret their, as you said, like traumatic reality as much? Like, what if they don't apply as much critical thinking or think about it? Yeah, that's my
This is such a good point, Alexandra. Thank you for it. You know, we have experienced this. There's nothing harder than asking people about their dreams. We have asked, you know, people that gave us narratives of their experience of war, fleeing to Finland. It wasn't the only question we asked them, but so many people would say they couldn't remember their dreams. And I thought, oh, there's something to it. Like that is itself significant. You know, they couldn't remember. Like actually lots of people couldn't sleep. That was interesting too. Like they didn't sleep for times that I wouldn't think it's humanely possible. So it seems like the body itself was functioning in this way, as Roman put it really well, not experiencing, but registering at the level, at the sensorial level. I mean, you know, I think kind of you already said that. Like, I think I would just look for moments when people find themselves then maybe daydreaming or you know, like forming associations and linking moments that they themselves could describe, that the kind of control of the consciousness is diminished, like without, of course, trying to bring it on, but it might, I think, I mean, that would be my hopeful answer. And yeah, that was very good. Thank you. And also, I just wanted to say that the previous person who wrote that point about thinking of dreaming as a way of surviving war, that was also a really kind of powerful way of summarizing my paper as well. So thanks.
We have a question from Elena Zaslavska. Please go ahead.
Здравствуйте ще раз. Справа в тому,
Good evening. Well, during the past 5 years, I participated in the project, and we are studying and analyzing the symbols of dreams. And there is this theory, which is already verified, that dream is the assembly of symbols, and each symbol has a meaning. And also that the subconscious, our subconscious, is talking to us with the help of dreams. In fact, in dreams, when people are dreaming, you also had this example that the soldiers before the battle, before the war, they dreamed about this war, this battle, like the warning, like the subconscious is trying to warn them, to make sure that the person has scenarios or a chance to avoid some event. In fact, my question is, do you accept this theory? I have studied Jung for a long time, and I relate a lot to him, but actually I came to this lecture because I was interested in the topic and in this theory. And also I want to say that in 2021, our project team started analyzing the dreams because people started getting dreams about war and combat. So we decided to analyze them. As a result of this analysis, we produced the map of Ukraine, where you could see the escalation, the hostilities. I have this map and I showed it to many people. And now the people who are in government, they were, you know, ridiculing. They were saying war is not possible. This could never happen. But people were dreaming about the beginning of the war, about the nightmare that we are living through today, 1 year before it actually broke out. Maybe before Magdalena answers that question, we also have the comment from Billy Glob, and he mentioned the famous Finnish neuropsychologist Anchorivanso. And he has this theory that dreams, in English, he calls they work in the same section of the brain that is responsible for safety. Well, it's more complicated, of course, but this theory is based on the fact the dream is the threat simulation. And this threat simulation allows you to survive and endure in reality the possible, maybe unfulfilled threat. So when we talk about the 4 big theories that are still relevant, wish fulfillment theory of Freud, the symbols and archetypes of Jung, the fact that dream has a physiological function only. There is this function like the water, they wash the brain and the psyche responds that we feel pain or we suffocate or something like that. Basically, the therapist will very often send you to see the doctor to check, you know, the body, the heart, etc. And there is this theory of threat simulation. And it's interesting to note, Bion's theory that dreaming is a way of thinking, this is also relevant. And maybe I will pass the floor to Magdalena on that. And give me 1 second. I will also need to say, yes, indeed, there are many types of dreams when they are saying that these are prophetic dreams and physiological dreams as well. These dreams usually signify something. I analyze this in practice and I can confirm that they have a certain function. When a person psychologically is not able to metabolize the situation, which is a very difficult situation, the dream sort of helps the psyche to metabolize that situation. In these dreams, the person relives the fears, and when they wake up, then the person has a different, more calm attitude to that fear. They have already processed it in the dream.
Do you have comments on this?
Not really, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Alena. It's I would love to learn more about this, and I just find it. I'm not an expert in symbolic approaches to dreams, but you know, I've really learned from what you said, and I have to say that the example you just gave about collecting dreams before the 2022 war and creating this map of dreams, I find it just absolutely extraordinary. Like, I would love to learn more. So maybe we could, I don't know, connect with each other somehow. I would really love that. So thank you.
Я з величезною радістю, я тільки хочу...
It will be a pleasure, a huge pleasure for me to share. I would like to share as much as I can to give this information to people that our subconscious wants to communicate with us, talks to us, help us in our development. So I will be happy to share with you and whoever is interested with my conclusions. As of today, for example, in autumn, when we analyzed about 60 dreams where people dreamed about explosions and missiles, I have the statistics already about what these dreams mean. And I will try to share as much as I can with the public so that people could understand when they see this dream, this could mean something and what they should do. Like the dream could warn you about something or calm you down. Like, don't worry, this is going to happen, but you are going to be fine. I will be happy to share. I have a lot of material. I have a lot of information and a lot of conclusions. I'm ready to share. And I really want as many people as possible to learn about that.
Я вам скину, Алено, ну, всім скину
I actually posted
в чат контакти
contact details of Magdalena on the chat.
But this is on your web page of your university. So it's the official information. Отже, можна по кліку перейти на опис того, де працює Магдалена, і там є її email.
You can actually follow the link and find the contact details of Magdalena, and you can write directly and share your experience. Here, I would like to emphasize that we are sharing about the dreams at the collection of diaries last year in March. We had a similar meeting, and Magdalena joined us, and she helped us a lot as a consultant, and she also helped us translate because she managed to get the funding from her faculty. So we translated these diaries and dreams. So we plan to publish a book with many authors. So feel free to write. Magdalena could be a very good contact for you. She's a great expert. Also, I need to add that the Center for Urban History plans to continue this project. In May, we would like to have a seminar, a workshop, international workshop with the professors from Columbia University, from Britain, from Finland, from Canada, and we will be discussing different methodologies of erasing the dreams, so that we could talk about the technique, the methods, as Olena described, or Oksana Kuzmenko is also present here, and she is in that topic. When you classify the dreams and how you record and register the dreams. For example, we have colleagues here that don't like to account about their dreams. They write them down. So we are ready to discuss the methodology of collecting and the dreams, because Magdalena said that collecting the dreams is also a form of war experiencing the war. It's a form of therapy. We are offering the other for others. And the Center for Urban History will still announce about this workshop, and also with Roman Kechur, who also attended today, we plan to launch this lab of dreams and imagination. It will be the academic lab, and we will try to employ different approaches, like ethnographers, historians, culture scholars, philosophers, psychotherapists could work with dreams from different perspectives and with different methods, and we will try to see the findings. Also, together with the Department of Psychology at the Medical University, with Alexander Fields and with the Unbroken Hospital, we plan to continue the collection of dreams that will allow us to create a broader archive of testimonies. As Magdalena started her lecture today, dreams are testimonies, and these testimonies could be the historical sources. In our workshop in the Cornell School of Law, a well-known professor researching international law said that dreams could also be used in the court hearings related to the crimes committed by the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine.
Okay, I don't see another hands. My colleague Mariana shared in the chat link also, so you can follow the link. And then, yeah, we don't have a map by Elena Zaslavska, but we hope that Elena either will share with us, with the Center for Urban History, or with Magdalena, and we will have the possibility to present this project
I will be happy to share this map of Ukraine, which identifies the hostilities that were described in dreams back in 2021. We couldn't hear her. We have the bad luck for internet connection for all users today, I think. I thought we already passed the threshold, but it happened. I don't see any other questions. And it's been a long discussion, so maybe it's time we say goodbye. And thank you.
I'd like to thank you, Magdalena, for this, for your input and for your work and for your support, for being with us already more than 1 year and helping Ukrainians to resist and not just survive, but as you say, endure, withstand, to become stronger. And thank you for this fruitful cooperation that we. Також дуже всім вам дякуємо. Ми не очікували такої великої аудиторії.
Thank you very much to all of you. We have not expected so many participants to be interested in that topic. We expected we are going to have, you know, a very small meeting, academic workshop, 5 people, and that's it. But we actually had 200 participants registered. Unfortunately, we had challenges in communication, but we hope that the disruption of connection did not become the obstacle for your understanding of Bion's concept about this possibility of dreaming as thinking, thinking as dreaming, finding the other, abandoning some, and death and others. I hope you understood these concepts, and we hope that these elements of Bion's theory will help us think more about that thinker. Actually, I really haven't known much about that. As Roman Kechur said, he didn't read much of Jung, but I personally didn't read much of Bion. But now I downloaded several books already, and I plan to delve deeper into that Bionian tradition. And also, Magdalena also helped me think more about Habermas, and also this is the French philosopher. And thanks to our cooperation, we keep learning more about the European thinkers that we probably understudied, and they are passing by, and we don't want to abandon them.
Can I just say also a word of thanks from me? Bohdan, thank you so much. Thank you for organizing, and thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And I just wanted to encourage anyone that would like to get in contact or has any questions to feel very, very welcome to send me an email. And finally, I also want to thank the interpreter who I thought did incredible work. So thank you so much. You've made this just so easy and so good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Тож мені залишається лише остаточно
попрощатися і подякувати. The final goodbye to everyone and the final thank you. The Center for Urban History will continue our events, and we will be happy to see you all during different events, not only related to psychology or psychotherapy, but also related to history, eager documents, and personal testimonies that will all help us together take this road and endure this road. Have a nice evening and have a peaceful sky.